Good morning, Shabbat Shalom. I am Rabbi Monica Kleinman. I am joined here by Leslie Zucker up here in the front and our technical team in the back this morning. Thank you to our BOW committee for bringing us beyond our walls. Let us know if you are technically inclined and would like to be part of the team. This morning we'll be doing things a little bit differently for our learning service. For those of you in person, you received a packet on the way in. It looks like this. And we will use that. We will go back and forth between the prayer book and the packet. For those of you joining online, there is a link to the handout. It'll be, if you're on Facebook, it'll be put in the Facebook chat. If you are using the virtual sanctuary, I believe the link should be right above us. And just a quick note, the packet I created using a program called Safaria. It's a great resource for Jewish learning. So for those of you who are online, there are no page numbers. It's just one continuous big long text. And you'll see that on the side, each text is numbered. So for those of you who are here in person, I'll be referring to the numbered text. If you get a little lost, ask a neighbor what page we're on. Maybe they'll say, it's text number 6 on page 4, or whatever it is. So we will not cover every single item in this handout. As you can see, it is quite big, and if you're scrolling, it is quite extensive. But these are all things that help us understand why we do what we do in the service. And so the service will flow a little bit differently. This is not going to be as smooth and seamless as a typical Shabbat morning service. We're going to kind of jump out. We're going to go back to the 30,000 feet level, and then we're going to jump right back in. You'll see a few notes on the top of either your packet or the sheet online. These are notes that help us understand why things are the way they are. But as Reformed Jews, it doesn't mean that we take them and incorporate them, no questions asked. Our job as Reformed Jews is to understand why it is the way it is and decide if that's something we want to incorporate into our practice or not. So if there's something you have been doing for many, many years and that's part of your ritual, whether it's standing or sitting or bowing or turning, and you don't see it here, that doesn't mean it's wrong. It could be just that I didn't get to that particular one because there's so many we could have. So please don't feel as if this is a proscriptive document, that this is what you have to do. Instead, we'll think of this as explaining why our service looks the way it does. And if you choose to include it, great. If not, that's okay too. You learned something, you did a mitzvah, learning why things look the way they do. So, and just a final reminder that we are calling the page numbers that are in the brackets. If you are following on the PDF at home, just keep going. If you are following along here, you'll see that you've got multiple sets of page numbers. So, or actually, you'll only have one set of page numbers, so you don't have anything to worry about. So
we're in service 2 today. For those of you who are page turned by habit, we're doing the other service today.
Yep, our prayer book gives us 2 options for Shabbat morning. Typically, when it's our small group, we do service 1, but today we're doing service 2 for a couple of reasons, one of which is that the footnotes in service 2 are really good, and they help explain a lot of things as well. It's also a more streamlined service so that we're able to see the flow of what goes into what next a little bit easier. So thank you for that reminder, Leslie. So if I turned on the clicker, that would help. We will continue with Moda Ani, which you can find on page 288. God, sovereign of the universe, with divine wisdom you have made our bodies, combining veins, arteries, and vital organs into a finely balanced network. Wondrous maker and sustainer of life, were one of them to fail, how well we are aware we would lack the strength to sustain life before you. Those are you, Adonai, source of our health and strength. Baruch atah Adonai, ofechol basar, umafli la'asot. Before we continue on page 293, see, I'm messing up the page numbers too. Page 293 contains a list of what we call Nisim B'chol Yom, our blessings for everyday miracles. And this is one where the footnotes are really wonderful. So the way our service works is that the stuff that's on the very end, the very beginning and the very end, was not typically things that were done together in the sanctuary. So as you look through the footnotes on 293 and as we continue on the next pages, this describes your morning routine. And these blessings exist to kind of give some meaning and some greater context, I guess, to our morning routine. So we talk about in the first blessing, the ability to distinguish day from night. That's that moment when you wake up, you haven't opened your eyes yet, and you go, oh, yep, the alarm's about to go off. Your body just somehow inherently knows that it's not 2 a.m. It's, 3 minutes until whatever time your alarm is set for that morning. So the actual translation of the Hebrew is usually very poetic and beautiful. God opens the eyes of the blind and frees the captive and lifts up the fallen. They're actually designed to complement what we do as we each get ready in the morning. So that hopefully helps a little bit explain why they look the way they do. So as we chant through them together, please feel free to let your eyes wander to the footnotes. And the footnote will tell you exactly what the physical action is and also one intended inspirational piece for the greater purpose of that step.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lesech vivina lehavchin ben yom uvein laila. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, pokeach ivrim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, matir asurim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, zokef kefufim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, rokah haaretz al hamayim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamechi mitzadei gaver. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, malbish arumim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hanoten le'ayef koach. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hama'avir sheina me'enai u'tnuma me'af apai. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asani b'tselem Elohim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asani bat chorim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asani Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, ozer Yisrael bigvura. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, oter Yisrael b'tifarah.
And although this next prayer looks like it's part of this litany, this big list, it is not. So let us read it together, just in reading, not in chanting. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai our God, sovereign of the universe, who hallows us with mitzvot, commanding us to engage with words of Torah. And that is exactly what we are doing this morning as we learn together. So words of Torah can reflect all sorts of Jewish teaching and learning. And so this will be our first step. We're going to step out of our prayer book and step to our handout or to the Sefaria sheet if you are following along online. And I thought that we would do just a couple of texts that would help us set the stage for what we're talking about. So the text we're looking at is called Shulchan Aruch. It is a compendium of all basically the Jewish rules that have come down to us through various texts as of the 16th century. And it's just a nice reference way to kind of go pick out things where you need them, and you don't have to sift through all of the other material, which, although interesting, is not your goal when you're looking for just a nice list. So the first thing I wanted to say is we were talking about a moment ago about something that you may incorporate into your prayer, a standing or a sitting or a turning that is not necessarily part of the tradition. And so one thing to say is the first text, which I love, one who wants to be stringent, to stand when one is sitting in order to recite it standing, is called a renegade. Don't do more. Don't feel like you have to be a martyr. The point is to learn, but the point is to not overdo it as well. So please don't feel as if you need to incorporate everything right away or you need to be some sort of hero in order to do everything just as the book. And the second text, I think, really speaks to our various modalities of how we worship today. There's a number of us here physically together and many of us joining at home. And if we had with a different microphone system, I would ask others to read, but since our voices are the only ones that go into the mic, I'll read it out loud for those who are auditory listeners, and I'll invite you to follow along with text number 2 if you're more of a visual reader. A person should make an effort to pray in the synagogue with the congregation. Pretty simple, that's why we exist. But if he is unable, due to an extenuating circumstance such that he is not able to come to the synagogue, not that we've had any of those in the last couple years, he should intend to pray at the time the congregation is praying. So the A scenario is we're all together physically, but we know the A scenario doesn't always happen. So the B scenario is for those, exactly what those of you at home are doing. You are joining us in real time. Some of you may be watching later, that's fine too. But for those of you joining us with real time, you are doing the mitzvah the way, one of the ways the mitzvah is intended to be done.
Yeah, it's interesting to think the C scenario wasn't an option, right? So if you were having surgery right now and could not be with us, you could watch the recording later and still pray with your congregation. And I bet they couldn't even imagine that option.
Absolutely.
That's really interesting to modern minds in ancient texts.
Yes, and so the earliest, some of these texts will have their roots in Torah, but many of them also have their roots in the Mishnah, which was compiled at the earliest about the year 200 BCE. So some of these texts are easily 2,200 years old. So it's hard to pinpoint exactly which text was codified when, but that's kind of the range we're thinking about, anywhere from Torah or the year 200 BCE up until about the 16th century, which was when it was finally put together in this form. And that's not to say that there haven't been developments in the last 400 years. They would just be in a different place. So a little bit about how we're standing, where we're sitting, and how we're oriented, because one thing you may have heard is that synagogues always face east. Has anyone ever heard that dictum before? Always face east, always face east. Well, that's not always the case. So if you're looking at text number 3, it's not about the synagogue facing, it's about you facing. So again, more individual. So when we stand up to pray, at whatever point, and you'll see Leslie and I at some points will turn around so that we're also facing this way. If you're in the diaspora, if you're anywhere but the land of Israel, you go towards the land of Israel, which for us just happens to be east. And then the way your mind is supposed to focus is towards Jerusalem, then the temple, which was in Jerusalem, and the Holy of Holies, the most inner part of the sanctuary in the temple. So we've got these cascading levels. But what if you're already in Israel? Would you face east? That doesn't make a lot of sense. You face Jerusalem. So if you are in a synagogue in the northern part of Israel, in theory, you would face south. If you are worshiping in the southern part of Israel, in Eilat, you would face north. So as much as it is, yes, synagogues always face east, that's our Western perspective of it. So then if you're looking towards Judaism, then you have the temple and the Holy of Holies, all the way down to, if you happen to be at the temple, in the temple plaza, the Western Wall plaza, where exactly do you face? You face at least as close as you can to where we think the Holy of Holies may have been. So it's all relative. What we consider absolutes, synagogues always face east, well, that's a Western American kind of idea. So I hope that brings a little bit of perspective. And finally, we're going to skip to text number 5. If you don't know what direction you're praying, if you're on a hike, actually, if you're a hiker, I would hope that you would know what direction you're going. But if for some reason you are in a place where you don't know, what matters is where your heart is facing. So if you're sitting at your computer at home and your computer is facing north, if you want to get up and stand and face east, you can. But what really matters is your intention, if all else fails. And so that is how I hope we'll start this morning. We'll skip ahead to one more text. It's a little out of order. I apologize. It's text number 12. Because we are about to...
Page 5, if you have page numbers.
Yes, thank you. So we have finished what we call the opening prayers section of the service, and we're continuing with Psuke de Zimra, which is Psalms of Praise. And this is a section that contains lots of psalms. And you may see people doing this as we recite the Psalm Ashrei, which is Psalm 140, the end of 149, or I'm totally blanking on 145. 150 is later on. So it's the end of 144 and then all of 145. And this is an acrostic poem. If you hadn't noticed, you can see the bold letters that they go in alphabetical order. You may see what we describe in text number 12. It says, one should focus one's heart during the verse, you open your hand. And if he does not focus, he must return and say the verse again. So there's this idea that if you don't do the prayer right, you have to go back and do it again. And there's some very technical language about what you have to go back and whatnot. But what you'll see is on the pay verse, which is in the Siddur on page 304, it says, open your hand, poteach et yadecha. and that's something we're saying this is something God does. God opens God's hand and gives every living thing reason or rationality. You may see some people actually physically opening their hand to go along with that. I've seen that before. So I had a liturgy professor who used to say, don't just stand there, do something. So if the text is saying you open your hand, may as well open your hand. So I invite you to continue with us with Psalm 145, Ashrei, on page 303. Ashrei yoshvei veitecha, od yehallelu selah. Ashrei ha'am shekachalo, Ashrei ha'am shadonai Elohav. Tehillah leDavid, aromimcha Elohai hamelech, vavracha shimcha leolam va'ed. Bechol yom avarchecha, v'halala shimcha leolam va'ed. Gadol Adonai umhulal me'od, v'ligdulato ein cheker. Dor ledor yishabach ma'asecha, ukevurotecha yagidu. Hadar kavod hodecha, v'divrei niflotecha asicha. Ve'ezuz norotecha yomeru, ukevudlatecha yagidu. Hadar kavod hodecha, v'divrei niflotecha asicha. Ve'ezuz norotecha yomeru, gedulatecha asaprana. I got lost, I'm sorry. Zecher rav tuvecha yabi'u, v'tzidkatecha yiranenu. Chadun v'rachum Adonai, erech apayim u'gedal chesed. Tov Adonai lakol, v'rachamav al kol ma'asav. Yoducha Adonai kol ma'asecha, v'chasidecha yevarchucha. Kavod malchutecha yomeru, guvuratecha yedaberu. Hodia livnei hadam gevurotav, uchavod hadar malchuto. Malchutecha malchut kol olamim, umemshaltecha bechol dor vador. Somech Adonai lechol hanoflim, v'zokef lechol hakfufim. Einei chol elecha yisaberu, v'atanotein lahem et ochlam beito. Poteach et yadecha, umasbia lechol chai ratzon. Tzadik Adonai bechol derachav, v'chasid bechol ma'asav. Karov Adonai lechol korav, lechol asher yikra'uhu ve'emet. Ritzon yoreav yaseh, ve'et shavatam nishma v'yoshiem. Shomer Adonai et kol ohavav, ve'et kol harshaim yashmid. Tilat Adonai yedaber pi, v'yivarech kol basar shem kodsho le'olam va'ed. Va'anachnu nevarech ya, me'ata ve'ad olam. Hallelujah. Psalm 150, next page.
Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Kol ha'tzevah tehallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Kol ha'tzevah tehallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah.
Well, since in our next few prayers we're about to get up and we're about to move about and bow and stand, I thought maybe we should talk about how does one get up and move about and bow and stand. So we're on text number 6. It's on page 3. And so number 6 talks about all the stuff you're not supposed to be bothered with when you're praying. So it says you're not supposed to hold stuff in your hand. You're not supposed to hold your tefillin, which is a ritual object we use on weekdays. That's why you don't see it here on Shabbat. You're not supposed to be holding that big red book in front of you. You're not supposed to be eating with a big old plate in front of you. Don't carry your knife and be playing with it during services. because that distracts you. Prayer is something that we are obligated to do according to tradition, and so we should give it our proper focus. Except for a lulav, on Sukkot, the commandment is to hold the lulav and move the lulav. So they wanted to make sure that if that was your objection, it's okay, it's cool to hold the lulav. But it's also okay to hold the things that help you pray. So in the ancient world, before books became readily available, people didn't hold prayer books. Everything was memorized and you just went through it. But they realized that at a time when this is text number 7, is that you're using the prayer book to help you pray. It's not a distraction. So maybe this is the idea of not flipping through the other pages of the prayer book when you're on a certain prayer, but I can say I'm guilty of that. So the idea is that the prayer book is a tool to help you pray. And so things that are not distractions, things that help you with your prayer, absolutely that's something to incorporate into your prayer experience, but try to get rid of the things that are going to detract from it. So now we're talking about posture. So if you have any yoginis or yogis in here, or on text number 8, how do you bow? There's a lot of ways we bow. We see people doing, full from the hips bowing. We see kind of a tip of the head. So believe it or not, we have a text that tells us just exactly how we're supposed to bow. That's how specific we get here in Jewish tradition. So you can see at the bottom of page 3 or text 8, one who is praying needs to bend till all the vertebrae stick out. Don't bow from your hips with your head remaining straight. That I think of as like a martial arts kind of bow. And rather, he should bow like his head is a reed. So I think that's kind of more like this kind of bow. So again, please remember that none of this is wrong or right. This is the way that tradition teaches us. But and we'll see later. Actually, let's go to number 9. Don't bow so far down until your mouth is opposite your belt. Okay, so that's not a full bow. Now, we will say there is on Rosh Hashanah, there is a full prostration, and please know the text likes to talk a lot about that, about going all the way to the ground, but that's not an everyday thing. But of course, we always have our caveat, and this is the second paragraph in number 9. If for some reason you can't bow, that's okay. So just tip your head. Again, it's about the kavanah, it's about the intention. So if you have lower back problems, and we'll get to standing in a minute too, and if you're unable to stand, that's okay. That it's all about the intention and how can you, using the body you have, demonstrate that intention. So we can see in number 9, once he lowers his head, that's enough, since it's clear that he wants to bow, but it is too painful. We'll read from Torah a little bit later this morning about how God gives us rules to live by them, not die by them. They're supposed to enhance our life and how we live. They're not supposed to cause us any pain or make anything we already have more excruciating or extenuating. And so the last one before we continue with a prayer in which we will bow, you bow quickly and in one motion. This is not a long, exaggerated stage bow. And when you straighten up slowly, head first, and then your body. You don't want it to be like a big burdensome. That's the idea of these things being a burden and demonstrating to God that that's a burden. That's not part of why we do what we do. So the idea is we do it smoothly in whatever way works for you. And if it does get to be a burden, then you change how you do it. You adapt the pose to work for you. So, in just a moment, at the end of our Chatzi Kaddish, which is our next blessing on page 312, there is a tradition in the last paragraphs to stand so that you're ready for the next prayer, which is Baruch Hu. So we will return to our Siddur on page 312.
Yitgadal, Yitgadal, Shemei Rabbah, Be'alma divrach yurtei v'yamlich malchutei, Becha yechonu yomechon, U'chayei b'chol Beit Yisrael, Ba'gala, Ba'gala, U'bizman kariv, Ve'imru Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabbah mevorach, le'alam la'ne'amaya, Yitbarach, Yitbarach v'yishtabach, Yitpa'ar v'yidroma v'yinaseh, V'yitadar v'yitaleh, Shemay Kedusha Barichu Leila Min Kol Birchata V'Shirata Tushvechata V'Nechemata Tamiran Be'ama V'Yiberu Amen. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 la. Baruch hu et Adonai ha-mevorach.
So out of the ordinary, I'm going to invite you to return to your seats. As I said, we're doing things a little differently this morning. So we have now entered what we call the Shema and its blessings section of the service. You see that really big on the top of page 313. And the Shema and its blessings section has its own choreography. Would you believe it? So we'll go to text number 11. Oh, you know what? Actually, let's get text number 11 for now. Let's go to 13. And you'll see on text 13, which is page 5, physical page 5, there's this is actually from Mishnah Torah. This is from Maimonides' compilation of things, which was a couple hundred years earlier. And when we see the Shema, we tend to think of the prayer, the two-line prayer, the beautiful prayer that gets the two-page spread in our prayer book. But when the rabbis refer to it, they mean this whole section of the service, the Shema and its blessings section. And that is a uniquely Reform idea. So when we'll get to the text in a second, but for those of you who, if you have been raised in a Reform environment, you stand for the Baruch, you sit down, then you stand up for the Shema, and you sit for Ve'ahavta, which is the longer prayer afterwards. And that actually goes against the halakha, against the way that tradition tells us. And that is because when the early reformers were looking at the service, they said, well, what is the most important thing that we need to know in a service? If someone takes one thing away from a Jewish service, what should it be? They said, well, the Shema. I'm like, okay, well, we should stand for that because people pay more attention when they're standing. I've heard this in other places. Well, people pay more attention to what you're reading when you're standing. And I don't know about that. I think people tend to kind of you pay attention to how your body feels, how your feet are moving. There might be some more distractions as people stand. So, but the idea was that this was something important and we should all be kind of at attention for it. We called it the watchword of our faith, if you've ever heard that phrase before. But as we look at the text, we can see why the Reformers' idea was helpful and important, but we'll see how it actually fits in with the greater idea of the Shema section. So this is actually one of the earliest discussions in Jewish literature and Jewish understanding of how to pray correctly, is how do you do the Shema correctly? So text 13 says, anyone can read the Shema in your ordinary posture, with your ordinary posture, standing, walking, lying down, or riding on an animal. The idea is that whatever you're doing, when it comes the time of the day to read the Shema, because we do it in the morning and the evening, you're not supposed to interrupt whatever you happen to be doing, with some exceptions, because there's always exceptions. But be the way you are. Make this a part of your routine. And if you're so we translate that as, if you're sitting before you say the Shema, stay seated while you say the Shema. If you're standing, if you already happen to be standing, say it. If you're up in a tree, stay up in the tree, actually depending on the type of tree it is, which I thought was very interesting. If it's an olive tree, it's a different system. But the idea is this is supposed to be, you don't necessarily need to come to the synagogue to say the Shema as part of your daily routine. So just make it part of your routine, whatever you're doing. But the whole point is that you're not supposed to be moving in between. So when the Reformers said we're standing and then we sit, that's actually like the one thing you're not supposed to do. But I understand why they got there, and I respect that. So again, no right or wrong. So the only place you can't do the Shema is if you're face down or you're face up. And face down has some very negative connotations in history and how it, basically we were reading about laws of honoring the dead, kavod hamet, earlier, and the one position you're not supposed to place a deceased person is face down. So face down, I guess, is very disrespectful. So we don't do that. And then you don't do it lying straight up. There's probably a little more respectful that you can give a little more respect than that. But if you're on your side, that's okay. If that's all you can do, so we can see in the last one, the reason that they give for this accommodation is corpulence, but there could be lots of reasons why someone can't turn, is that, do as much as you can to not be, neutral. Turn to one side or the other to do the best you can during this section of the service. And so as part of the Shema, because they don't distinguish, we have in Ve'ahavta, we have the commandment to V'hayu ha'devarim ha'ela, and that's the list of the things that you're supposed to do, and one of them regards your tzitzit. So if you're wearing a talit this morning, there's actually a number of places where there's tradition to actually use them and hold them in different times. Sometimes you kiss them, sometimes you put them to your forehead, and they are a physical reminder of the commandments in this exact prayer. So if we're saying the prayer that describes the ritual object you're wearing, you may as well incorporate that actual ritual object into what you're doing. So you can see it says on number 4, text 14, you grasp the tzitzit with your left hand. Left has a special connotation in Jewish tradition because it's the side that's closest to your heart. And so when it says these words shall be on your heart, you take the tzitzit and you put it on your heart. Again, it's not rocket science, right? It's painfully simple sometimes. And there's a few other ones. I took those out. Oh, no, here we go. And in text number 16, you should bind them as a sign upon your hand. If it was a weekday and you were reciting this while you were wearing tefillin, you touch the part where, you put it on your hand, between your eyes. Again, calling out the things that the prayer tells us to do actually in real time. It's a very good educative tool as well. And then the last one, we'll have to back up a little. There is a tradition, and many of you have seen this. We do this sometimes on Sunday mornings. When it comes to Shema, we sometimes put our hand over our eyes. And that's another idea to keep us concentrating. So when I say this to our young friends on Sunday morning, I say, it's something to help you focus inward. It's to get out all the distractions. So honoring that Shema has been called the watchword of our faith, the main point, the big point of Judaism, that's when we should give it its utmost attention, and we can demonstrate that we're giving it attention by covering our eyes. So a little food for thought as we go into the next section of our service. There's also a point, did we do it here? Did I say we're doing it? Yes, we'll get that in just a second. So let me see. Oh, no, we're going to do it now. Okay, so on page 317, so before we say the Shema itself, we have this prayer called Ahava Rabbah, and we thank God for Torah. And there's actually a section that has been included in this prayer book, Mishkan Tefillah, that was not in the previous edition. So if you use the little gray one or even the big blue one behind it, one of the big differences in this prayer book, which was published in 2005, is that it has more of an Israel focus than other Reform prayer books in the past. So if you look at the top of page 317, you see the words, V'havienu l'shalom me'arba kanfot ha'aretz. And it means we're asking God with peace to bring us from the four corners of the earth, which is very much an Israel-focused thing. What some people do is they take the four corners of their talit, again, not too hard, there's four corners, and you bring them together. As we're asking God to bring people together from the four corners of the earth, we hold the four corners of our talit together. So I know I threw a lot at you. It's a lot to digest. I want to make sure you have the text in front of you so that you can refer back to it later. Let us continue on page 317 with that paragraph at the top. And actually, that's what the footnote exactly says, what I just said. And let's just say that first line together, V'havienu v'shalom. V'havienu l'shalom me'arba kanfot ha'aretz. Asking God to bring us all together. And let us read the last line. Baruch atah Adonai Habocher be'amo Yisrael be'ahava.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed.
Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavecha v'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'odecha ve'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta b'ham b'shivtecha b'veitecha u'v'laktecha b'derech u'shochecha u'v'kumecha u'kshartam le'ot al yadecha v'hayu letotafot b'neinecha u'chtavtam al mezuzot beitecha u'visharecha leman tizkeru v'asitem et kol mitzvotai v'tem kedoshim le'elechem ani Adonai Elohechem asher hotzeiti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim liot lachem Elohim ani Adonai Elohechem emet. So did you make a choice about your transition between Shema and Ve'ahavta? You see, I didn't give any commands from the front because I wanted each of you to try something new. So please remember that, we have our tradition here at Beth Torah, but however you want to incorporate this into your practice, I invite you to do so. So the next piece I wanted to go to. So the next piece we will sing Mi Chamocha in just a minute, and that will transition us out of our Shema and its blessings section of the service into what you can see. It says on page 323, it's called the Amidah. Tefillah, it says Tefillah, and Tefillah means prayer. And remember how I said at the beginning, the stuff at the beginning and the end of the service was tacked on? So the Tefillah, this section is the core of the original. This is what prayer meant. When people said, when the rabbis would say, when you pray, they meant this particular set of texts. And everything else got tacked on around it. So when we say you pray 3 times a day, that means that you do this section 3 times a day, morning, afternoon, and evening. The Shema section, as we learned from Ve'ahavta, you say when you wake up and when you go to sleep. So that part's only twice a day. So if you ever attend a midday service, a mincha service, it is just this middle section. So this is the section, believe it or not, because it's the oldest, it has the most stuff. It has the most accoutrements, I would say. And as you can see, text number 17, some of these just have a citation and some have a little header as to what this section is about. And it says, laws of bowing in the Shmona Esrei. Now, Shmona Esrei refers to the weekday version of this section, but if something is applicable in the weekday version, it's also applicable on Shabbat. So we have to go back to the original one. If I just went to the Shabbat ones, you'd just see the Shabbat exceptions. So Shmona Esrei means 18, and in this section on a weekday, you'll find 19 benedictions. There's 19 blessings. There's a whole argument about which one is the 19th one, which one was added later. Historians and liturgists will argue with that one, depending on what text we found at what point and what contained what. So it's just kind of ironic that as Jews we say there's 18 of something and there's really 19. So you may notice this is a time when a lot of people bow at the beginning of the prayer, at the end of the prayer. There's some back and forth. There's some middle. So I want to bring a little clarity to that. And the part of 17, it's pretty clear. These are the blessings which we bow. In the Avot, our version is Avot V'imahot, because we're egalitarian around here, at the beginning and at the end. In Modim, which is one of the later prayers, that's the prayer that's a gratitude prayer, at the beginning and the end. That's it. It says, if someone comes to bow at the end of every blessing, or at the beginning, we teach him not to bow. But in the middle of a blessing, you can. It's kind of like if the Spirit moves you in the middle and you're getting there, you're moving around. This whole section is typically said standing. And we all know that when we stand for a while, it's hard to stand solid like a statue. If you've ever been in a choir, you got to, right, you tell people to bend their knees?
Yes, so you don't pass out.
Right, because if you're going to stand there with your knees locked for that long, it's not good for your body. So, yes, if you got to move around a little bit, but in terms of the formal, when you bow and when you don't, you do at the beginning and at the end of the two prayers, one at the beginning and one at the end. But again, if we look at prayer 18, or text number 18, again, if you're not able to get up and move about like that, that's okay. The kavanah, the intention that you're engaging in prayer, is enough if you have that type of limitation. And then, I just want to make sure we're going on the right ones. So here's a silly question. How do you stand? Believe it or not, they're going to tell us how to stand. So number 19, it says, you put your feet next to each other as if they are one, because there's a line from the book of Ezekiel that describes feet. So that's clearly how we have to stand all the time. Their feet appeared as 1 foot. Again, that's a very lovely intention, a nice connection to our sacred text about turning it into some action. Again, if doing that, you can still kind of bend your knees a little bit when you're standing like that. But don't do it if it's going to, if your ankles are...
Mess with your balance.
Exactly, because you're going to also be moving about as well. So during this whole section, I'm looking at text number 20 here. This is not you're not supposed to stare around and oh, look at that light. No, it helps with your intention if you're looking at your book or your eyes are down, because then there are fewer things to distract you. This is one of the sections that if you mess up or you come in late, you have to start over. Ooh. Because this needs to be done. This is prayer. This is it. And so it's got to be done, with the proper intention. And if you make a mistake, you want to go back and correct that mistake. So this gives us a lot of physical actions to help us focus in the way we need to focus, so we don't need to do it 5 times. If you get to prayer 16 and you're, man, I messed up a word, you got to go back, which actually, at a certain point you have to do. So according to tradition. So, I'm sorry. No,
he said no pressure when you were bar mitzvah.
Yeah, exactly. So in the traditional world, you were the shliach tzibur. This section actually, you do it silently and then you do it out loud, typically in a more traditional format. So you get a couple extra chances. So and then number 20 is one connection. Put your what did they say? Your right hand over your, and of course it goes through the left. Here are ways, what do you do with your hands when you pray? One thing is right hand over left. Stand like a servant before one's teacher with terror, awe, and fear. Be respectful. And it says, but finally, don't do this. Because then you're just a know-it-all. Even back then, this was the know-it-all stance. So, ideally, you're holding your book. Again, the whole point is to help you focus on what you're saying. And here are some things that would detract from that. So don't do those detractors. Now, granted, if you've got some lower back problems and you need to, put your hands like this, that's another story. But, how dare you come before God with this posture that you're the know-it-all? Is kind of what we're getting at, is that this is a time for humility. This is a time for introspection. So let's make our bodies move as if we are projecting that. And then finally, number 22, how exactly do you bow at the beginning, at the end? On Baruch, that was for earlier. That was for Baruch, and then for Baruch atah Adonai in the beginning, you go Baruch atah, and then back up on Adonai. Just a quick little one. You don't have to
try that. So we talked about that the last time we did a learning.
Yeah.
Maybe it was Rabbi Katapan.
Yeah.
Maybe it wasn't you. And I've been doing that on the Amidah, and it can make you dizzy. Be careful. The Baruch atah Adonai is a fast one when you're chanting.
And I'm going to comment, Leslie, on how you did it. You just went hips down. I go down with my knees first, and then I do knees up. And that way my head moves a little bit, and then I'm not, does that make a difference for you?
No, it's still really fast.
Okay, that's fine. So I just say sometimes going with having the knees bring your hips down.
I do bring my knees when I'm in the moment, but
Right. It's hard to replicate when you're talking about it ex nihilo, like just out of it. So again, I invite you as we'll sing Mi Chamocha, we'll finish up our Shema section and go right into our Amidah, our Tefillah section. So I invite you to experiment, to try some of these things out if they're not normally part of your repertoire, or to just bring a little bit different of a mindset as we engage in our central prayer on this Shabbat morning. But we will continue on page 322 with Mi Chamocha and Sur Yisrael.
Mi Chamocha ba'elim Adonai, Mi Chamocha neheta b'kodesh, Nora tehilot toseh feleh, Nora tehilot toseh feleh, Shira chadashah shibechu gilim, Leshimcha al sat hayam, Yachad kulam hodu v'himlichu ve'ameru, Adonai yimloch, Adonai yimloch, le'olam va'ed. Sur Yisrael, kuma bezrat Yisrael, uvdechinu mecha, Yehuda v'Yisrael, go aleinu Adonai tzvaot shemo, Kadosh Yisrael, Baruch atah Adonai, Gal Yisrael.
I'm going to pause. One more interruption. We stood up on the word kuma, which means stand up. Again,
The Jews are a
logical.
very practical people.
Absolutely. Let's continue with our Amidah, page 323.
Adonai sefatai tiftachu fi yagid tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu v'Elohei Avoteinu v'Imotenu, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, v'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'Konei Hakol, V'Zocher Chasdei Avot V'Imahot, U'Mevii Gula Livnei Bneihem, L'Ma'an Shemo Be'ahava, Melech Ozer U'Moshia U'Magen, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham V'Ezrat Sarah. Atah Gibor Le'olam Adonai, Mechayim Eitim Atarav Lehoshia, Morid Hatal, Mechalchel Chaim Bechesed, Mechayim Eitim Berachamim Rabim, Somech Noflim V'Rofech Oholim, Umatir Asurim, Umekayem Emunato, Lishenei Afar, Michamocha Baal Gevurot, Umidon Melach, Melech Memit, Umechaye, Umatzmiach Yeshua, Nemanat Halachayot Metim, Baruch atah Adonai, Mechayei HaMetim.
I'm going to call a quick audible, all right, because I'm looking at time and I want to make sure I'm respecting everyone's time, but also getting information in. So before we continue, we're going to do Kedusha on page 326. And this is one where there is some movement, and I want to make sure that we talk through why. I don't have textual ones for this, so this will be verbal. You can see in the first paragraph on 326, at the last line of the first paragraph says "V'karazeh el zeh v'amar," which says, "And one said to the other." And this prayer talks about God's glory, and so the idea is that who are the ones who are talking to each other about how awesome God is? Those are the angels. So the idea is you could do "V'karazeh el zeh v'amar," and one said to this one, said to that one, And this is what they said. So you're like talking to your buddies. And then you say, Kadosh, 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 meaning holy, holy, holy. You go up on your tippy toes, because that's as close as we can get. We're a little bit closer to God, just a little bit on each Kadosh. So that is the choreography for that one. And then we'll stop, and then we'll go to the end of our Amidah, which the rest of we'll do silently. That's text 23, and this is what you can decide to do. We do it a little differently because we sing Oseh Shalom and Yehi Ratzon, but as you can see, there's a little choreography there if you ever like to try that out. So we'll continue with our Kiddushah that will take us through the rest of our Amidah.
All right. We thought that audible was a little strange with that one insertion. We are running a little short on time, so I'm going to make a couple changes. So for those of you following at home, the prayer book pages are not going to be consistent. Don't worry, we're not adding anything that's not there. We're just skipping past some things that are. So instead of taking the Torah out, and I had a whole section in here about what you do when the Torah is out and who holds it, and so please feel free to peruse that on your own. I'm happy to talk about it. Believe it or not, when the Sefer Torah is out, there's a whole bunch of ways about what you're supposed to do, what you're not supposed to do, who's supposed to go up there, what they're supposed to be wearing, the type of person who goes up there, the order in which people go up there, because you don't want to confuse. It's a big thing. But the text in there will explain sometimes when you see someone go up for an aliyah, they may take their tzitzit and touch the specific words. It's a confirmation of these are the exact words where I know the reader is going to start. In the ancient world, and ideally, the original setup was that the person who did the blessing was the same person who did the reading. Only later did that come to be two separate roles. So the idea is that, the gabbai, the person, kind of the administrative person up there, says that's where you're starting. They go, oh, yep, that's where I'm starting. I'm going to say the blessing, and then I'm going to go right back to that same spot. Immensely practical, right? There's a discussion about how you hold the wooden parts. Those are called eitzei chaim. Each one is called an eitz chaim, a tree of life, because they hold up the Torah. Neat. And then who does it? How do you roll it? If you're reading from different sections, how do you roll them? All these things. So that all kind of goes into our theme of this morning, and that we're here to learn how these traditions have come to us. And our Torah portion this morning it introduces what we call the Holiness Code. It's the section we read on Yom Kippur afternoon. And the reason it was chosen for Yom Kippur afternoon is they knew people would be there and be listening. And I'm serious, some of this is actually really simple. They knew that this was a time where they would have a captive audience. So what section should we assign when we know we have a captive audience? All these rules about how to get along in a community. And so the section, this is the beginning of chapter 18 of Leviticus. And it says, God spoke to Moses and said, hey, listen, these are the things the special laws I'm giving you specific people whom I took out of the land of Egypt. You're going to have a special role in, we talk about being a light to the nations, a priestly nation, things like that. Is that not to say that we're any better than any other group, but we just have a different set of traditions and laws that have come to us and are unique to us. And the line that I think really encapsulates what we've been doing this morning when we're talking about a lot of physical movement is that verse number 5 says, and you should keep these laws and these statutes, and every person shall do them, and you shall live by them. I am God. And the commentators come along with, what does that mean you shall live by them? I mean, these are the laws you use to govern your life. These are the people who you can have relationships with. These are the things you're not supposed to do in order to be a good neighbor. The good fences make good neighbors. That kind of comes from, making sure you know what the boundaries are between you and your neighbor. But ultimately, they say, what does it mean to live by them? You live by them, you don't die by them. You're not supposed to follow these so arduously that they cause you pain. So we talked about the example being corpulence, that you're not able to get into the right position. You do your best to show that you know and understand and your intention is there, despite your physical limitations. You're not supposed to, this is a very common one, speaking of Yom Kippur, you don't fast on Yom Kippur if that is going to cause you some significant physical disruption or pain. You still take your medicine. If your medicine says take it with food, listen, you don't, take out a big birthday cake and eat it with a birthday cake. You have a little, whatever it is to make sure that the medicine doesn't upset your stomach. These are not supposed to be limiting factors in our lives, but we're also supposed to show that we know and understand them, and we respond as if we understand, demonstrating understanding of knowledge, and saying that God gave us these for us to learn, and we can respond saying, I've learned this, however it is that it can manifest and enhance your life, not limit your life. If getting up and bowing like that is making you dizzy, figure out another way to bow so that you don't get dizzy. That's the last thing we want for you, Leslie. So my hope is this morning is that we've learned a little bit more about how we can use the traditions given to the Jewish people and that we can live by them and they can enhance us and they can uplift us. And if something sits to you as it is limiting, that it is not going to enhance your life, as a Reformed Jew, you've done your job. You've learned about the tradition and you've evaluated it for yourself and how it fits in your life. So I wish for all of us this morning an increased sense of knowledge and ownership of our Jewish tradition. And as proud Reformed Jews, you take that and you incorporate it in a way that makes sense for you in your life. So one of the things that we can do when we have a sense of sometimes what we do doesn't make a difference is we can say a mishaberach for healing, a prayer for those in need of healing. When there is no more action that can be taken, we know they're getting the best medical care. All we can do is direct our hearts and intentions towards those we love and pray for their healing. Let me get my little intro here. So we are on page 371. I'm going to skip ahead. And for those of you looking for the names of those in our Beth Torah community whom we are saying a prayer for healing for this morning, you can find it in the e-news that you received yesterday or the link in the comments. I believe we also have a handout here for those in person. If you would like to offer a name to add to our Mishaberach list, if you are at home on Facebook, please type their name in the comment box. And if you are here in person, I will invite you to share their names as I pass my hand across the room. We continue with the words on the middle of page 371. I said a few moments ago that when our rabbis talked about prayer, they meant that tefillah, that Amidah section of the service. And then on Mondays, Thursdays, and Shabbat, we had this Torah service. So if we direct our eyes to the handout number 31, it's on page 11. We skipped a whole bunch of them. We can go back to it. When can I leave? It is forbidden for one to leave the synagogue before this particular section. And so that was a section that has to do with the Amidah, so if it's not a Torah reading day. But then we have a commentator who comes and adds a bit. And this will look familiar. At the conclusion of the prayers, we say Aleinu l'shabeach while standing. Sounds familiar? And you say it with concentration, and then you can see the last line in that paragraph. He should pause for a moment before saying Va'anachnu korim, which in our text, if you're looking at the text on page 586, is broken into a different paragraph. And I'm going to throw a big surprise at you. Nachnu korim means and we bow. So we bow at that piece. And I've seen different traditions about when people come up from that bow. But Nachnu korim, you can see it's indented a little bit. So you bow, you come up from your bow though by the word lifnei melech, because lifnei means in front of or before. So you don't want to be in front of the king bowing for too long. You want to come back up. So you'll also, and then after that, it talks about the mourner's Kaddish, and when you say Kaddish, and making sure that, if someone is there to say Kaddish, you say Kaddish. You may see sometimes that after the mourner's Kaddish, while there's still stuff going on, there's usually announcements, there's, a closing song, whatever, people will start to take off their talitot, because that's kind of when the formal service is done. Everything else is, announcements and then a lovely closing song, but none of that is actually prescribed in the actual outline of the service itself. So that's the question, is when can I get out of here? I'm going to start getting dressed or unpacking or putting my stuff away because I'm getting ready to go. It's like the kids packing up their books 3 minutes before the bell rings. So with that in mind, that these are the closing pieces of our service, I invite you to rise and join me on page 586.
Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol, l'teit gedula leotzer breshit, shelo asanu kegoyei haratzot, velo samanu kemishpachot ha'adama, shelo sam chelkeinu kahem, vegor aleinu kechol hamonam, v'anachnu korim, ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד Ushemo. Before we transition to Kaddish, I have to share a story about Aleinu. And this would not have appeared in Shulchan Aruch. This is an early modern invention. So in some congregations, you may see that in addition to facing the ark, people open the ark for Aleinu l'shabeach. And that tradition came about in the early modern period, like in the 1700s and 1800s. And that was a time in which there were increasingly powerful state governments, and they were increasingly interested in what Jewish people were doing and saying in their services, because they wanted to make sure that they weren't bad-mouthing the government or anyone else. That's also why we have the prayer for the government in our text. That was a later addition, to make sure that people knew when they came to visit that we were good citizens if we were allowed citizenship. But Aleinu is a different story. So as I was doing my research on what are you supposed to do in the synagogue, what's prohibited in the synagogue, spitting in the synagogue was just fine. I think about like middle school boys where they feel like they just have this need to spit and they spit on this. I think it's the grossest thing, but sometimes you got something in your mouth you got to get out of. And it says it's fine to spit in the synagogue as long as you, rub it out with some dirt with your foot, which I think is the grossest. Not our world. It's a different world. So anyways, there became this tradition. I don't know actually how widespread it is, but it got back to the authorities that there was a certain prayer in which the Jewish people would spit at the idea of their the religious practices of other people. Yeah, and the authorities didn't like that so much. So it was actually in Aleinu, there's another paragraph we typically don't say, and let me see if it's, we don't have it in our prayer book because it talks about, Aleinu is talking about it's our duty to praise God. And in this paragraph that the reformers removed, which you'll see for a very good reason why, it talks about how other people pray to gods that are full of hevel and rake, like emptiness and nothingness. That we don't pray to those gods, we pray to our God. Okay, all right. I can understand it theologically, but here's the pun. Rake means emptiness. If you turn it into a verb, leharik, to empty, literally means to spit. So there's a theory, and I don't know if this actually happened or the story just got back, that when we would recite this prayer, people would spit at the idea of hevel v'rik, because it's a pun on the word of emptiness.
And people said, we got to stop this. These authorities are coming to our synagogue. Like, if they see us spitting at that, and they couldn't stop people from spitting in the synagogue because they said, the texts say it's fine. So what did they do? They opened the ark during this prayer because no one would spit in the presence of the Sefer Torah. That is how the legend goes. I do not account for its veracity, but that is the legend.
But it's so believable.
Yes.
Like everything about that story, I'm like, yeah, that sounds Jewish.
Yeah, because there's certain rules when the Sefer Torah is out, of you're not supposed to leave the room, you're not supposed to enter the room, you're not supposed to do this, that, the other thing. And so they said, okay, we can't tell them to stop because we've told them and they're not stopping. So let's use some force that's greater than our own. So that's just a little riff on Aleinu. But the reformers said, you know what, this is such a paragraph that has caused so much problems. We want to be neighbors with people in our community. We need to cut this out. This is not part of our understanding. So it's a little couple steps removed for us as Reformed Jews. But let us now change our focus to those we have lost. This is a part of our Jewish tradition that we not only remember as individuals, the people we've loved, but we share that memory with our community. And so let us join together on page 595. And we'll read the reading at the bottom of the page. This is an Israeli poem. I happen to like it a lot. There are stars up above, so far away we only see their light, long, long after the star itself is gone. And so it is with people that we loved. Their memories keep shining ever brightly, though their time with us is done. But the stars that light up the darkest nights, these are the lights that guide us. As we live our days, these are the ways we remember. Our congregation Beth Torah community this week is in the Shloshim period, the first 30 days of mourning for Ron Simons, brother of Linda Gepford. We are remembering on their yard sites George Altman, Laverne Amond, Janice Eichler, Dorothy Fagenbaum, Albert Ferber, Katie Finkelstein, Louise Stam Garfinkel, Lisa Jones, Rosa Kafitz, Nancy Levine, Martin Levin, Ilsa Michael, Ann Waldman Moskowitz, Ned Nelkin, Sandra Oberman, Stanley Oberman, Stella Paris, Norton Polinsky, Daniel Rudman, Saul Samazin, Jack Scott, Miriam Shaw, Pam Smith, Marge Taggart, Harold Weingarten, May Willer, and Vivian Zilberman. There are others you're remembering. Please feel free to type them in the chat box at this time. And as a community, we rise as we recite Kaddish Yatom with one another, supporting those in our community on page 598. Yit Gadal, Yit Kadash, Shemei Rabbah. Be'alma divrach nirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon uvyomechon uv'chaye dehol Beit Yisrael, v'agala u'izman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei rabbah mevarach la'alam u'lamei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yithalal shmei dikudisha barichu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, da'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom v'imromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen.
Oseh shalom b'imromav. Shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru, amen.
Please indulge me one last time. So the movements that Leslie did at the end of Kaddish Yatom is not unique to Kaddish Yatom. This is what we call liturgical cloning. When we see something we like, we do it again and again. And if you look back, actually, text 23, which describes what you do at the end of the Amidah section, because the Amidah section ends with Oseh Shalom. This prayer also ends with Oseh Shalom. It describes exactly what Leslie was doing. So liturgical cloning is when we like something, we do it again and again. There's lots of prayers in our service that weren't originally there, but we're put in because people like them. So, and that's right, we're supposed to like services. So to tell you the next time you can come to services and enjoy and do more great things at Beth Torah, it's my pleasure to invite Aviva, as we introduce her with Aviva's song, to share some announcements.
This is Aviva's song. The announcements are coming, they won't take too long. If you want to do some Jewish, she won't steer you wrong. This is Aviva's song.
All
You
good.
would not.
Good morning. It took me a few extra steps. Oops. Okay. Thank you very much to Rabbi Kleinman and Leslie Zucker for leading this learning service. Thank you to Dave for bringing us beyond our walls every single Shabbat service and more. So thank you. A few quick announcements. The next service is Israel Shabbat, Friday, May 6th, which is this coming Friday, with the choir and band. The choir and band spanned 8 decades between them. So the members of the choir and the band are in their 10s to 80s. Yep, it's amazing. So join us in person or, of course, online for a wonderful Shabbat. And following, we will have a special Mediterranean-themed oneg to taste Israel as well. So join us next Friday, May 6th. Before then, tomorrow is the annual meeting. So we will be back in the sanctuary at 10:30 a.m., and it will be on Zoom. So join us however is most comfortable to you. Following the annual meeting, we will have another gift shop sale. So join us in the Ulam, bring a piece of Beth Torah home with you. And then on Tuesday, May 3rd, we have the Good Faith Network Nehemiah Assembly, which is the largest assembly of this huge social justice initiative. Carol and I both have tickets. So everyone here, we're glad to give you a free ticket. And if you don't have a ticket, it's okay too, and I'll be outside Church of the Resurrection, which is where it's happening.
I actually have a whole set of tickets in my office now. I got them the other day.
Great.
So you
3
can
of
pick
us
one
do.
up. Yep.
All right, great. So there's a lot going on. I'm going to stop there for now, but take a look in the e-news for everything else. And Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Aviva. And again, a text I didn't include, but it says you end your service with Adon Olam or Ein Keloheinu. Those are the different, because there's different services that we've all combined into one. Those have become our Shabbat morning standbys. So we will end with an Ein Keloheinu, and this is a custom you see only at Congregation Beth Torah, is that we all rise for our closing song. I guarantee you won't find that in the Talmud.
Ein Keloheinu, Ein Kadoneinu, Ein Timokeinu, Ein Timoshienu, Ein Keloheinu, Ein Kadoneinu, Ein Timokeinu, Ein Timoshienu. Mi Eloheinu, Mi Kadoneinu, Mi Timokeinu, Mi Timoshienu. Ein Keloheinu, Ein Kadoneinu, Ein Timokeinu, Ein Timoshienu. Ein Keloheinu, Ein Kadoneinu, Ein Timokeinu, Ein Timoshienu. Atahu Eloheinu, Atahu Adoneinu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu.
Shabbat Shalom.
Take care of each other out there.